So with the open HTTP redirect, this one is not as obvious. So we'll go ahead and click here, quote, go back, quote to, good movies, by the way. But the vulnerability essentially is actually not visible per se, but we can see it down here at the bottom where it's showing us where the redirect or where the link would go. So for representation purposes, we'll go ahead and copy it and we'll open a new tab. And here we see the parameter that is essentially vulnerable, redirect. And it's going to an internal page, info.php. Now, in this case, because the web application is not sanitized to mitigate this, we can do something like this. And we go to a place that we didn't necessarily want to go. So with that, we can go ahead and protect that parameter, the redirect parameter, within the web application firewall. So first, we'll go ahead and create our URL like we've been doing. And we'll come over here and add it like we've been doing. Wildcard, enable, and go. Go to our parameter. And just to clarify again, our URL, or our parameter specifically for that matter, is going to be a redirect. So go ahead and create that. And same thing, no staging. Because it could potentially be empty. I mean, in this case, no, it's not, but forward thinking, we'll go ahead and allow the potential for it to be empty because, well, I mean, if it's empty, who cares? In this case, if you're an authentication page, then you kind of want some parameters or things to be populated, like a session cookie. Not necessarily this is a parameter versus a cookie, but point in case could be relevant. So repeated occurrences, well, you can only be redirected once. So it's fair to say that that's impossible to have multiple here. So we'll go ahead and allow or not allow that. Make sure allow is set. Now for the length, this one gets a little tricky. Depends on the context. Like if you're just redirecting to a domain or a page, the length is going to be very short. But if you're going to redirect to a page with a domain and a URL, URI path essentially, then it certainly can get lengthier. If you also want to include a parameter on the query, such as like a Google click ID or a Facebook click ID parameter, then you need to make it longer. So 256 and 512 is a common one I tend to use. If I know parameters are going to be used, a lengthy one, particularly like a click ID, 512 tends to be a little more appropriate, and I've had to go even up to like 1024 and significantly further. But just to start out with, we'll go ahead and go with 256. Now I could do 128, and again, I'd like to just roll with bit values because bit values have reference to database storage limitations. They tend to be very limited around those kind of figures. So this is where the concept that I get, where I come from, in the sense of defining, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, because back to the password example earlier with the fixed 32 character length, that actually is a database limitation of 32 characters in many, many, many situations. Again, not as common these days, SSL, SSO, etc. We won't go there another day. But for the moment, we'll just roll 256 because the length isn't so much the damage, it's the destination. So moving on, the characters, we'll go ahead and put controls here. For our typical URL, we don't have spaces, but we do have %20s. So this actually justifies allowing space regardless because it could potentially happen. Exclamation marks? No. Hash symbols? Yes, because of page kind of topic reference IDs. So parentheses and the rest of these, not really. Slash, well, it's kind of a URL, so we need to allow that. Dashes, absolutely. Question mark, certainly for the parameter. At symbols, this one's iffy. Usually you would not allow this, but in certain frameworks, it tends to be a common thing. So it's either it's there or it's not. So we'll go ahead and assume it's not going to be there. And in time, if we discover it is because framework changes or whatever, then we'll allow it. Same thing with these, not very common for web URLs, but are they allowable? Can they be seen? Yes, absolutely. But does it happen often? Not usually. So we'll go and assume no. And then plus, spaces get converted to plus in certain instances, especially when you do encoding changes. So we'll go and allow that, naturally allowed by default. And then period, well, it's kind of necessary for domain names. And we'll go ahead and set these all to disallow now. And overall, looking pretty good. Now, in reality, this is going to gain a lot of protection functionality from attack signatures as well, but there's some additional functionality that is really going to take care of this one, and we'll cover that here in a second. So first, we'll go and create this. And now we'll look at how this is actually protected. So we'll come down here to headers and redirection protection. And this is where we define the domain names that are allowable for a redirect to occur. And a redirect does require a 302 or 300, 301 response, essentially 300 of some sort, but a redirect nonetheless. So as long as a redirect occurs, then this gets invoked, this validation check. So it's validating to make sure that this is going to come from one of my domains, because evil.com is the example that we demonstrated earlier. Because that is not part of my domain list, this will automatically get flagged as essentially bad and be blocked if I so set the option to do so. Take note, I do have the ability to include subdomains if I so choose, so I only have to enter the key domain, and then all the child subdomains will automatically get included for simplicity purposes, but not always a good idea because it is potential that your DNS could have been compromised and someone could set up, myevildomain.waflogic.com. And they could have it redirected somewhere else because it compromised my DNS, and so they could send it off to a bad place. So this depends on how you want to take your approach. But in my case, because I manage all my DNS and we have it pretty well locked down, so we can make a fair assumption that we can roll with the ability to allow subdomains, but hopefully it doesn't bite me one day and I don't eat my words. Knock on wood. All right, moving on. So because evildomain.com is not here, again, it will be blocked. And we'll demonstrate all these examples and how the protection actually applies later on. We're just rolling with the WAF configuration. So by doing this, that effectively controls and takes care of all our needs for open HTTP redirect. Now, moving on to our next one, we'll go ahead and go with command injection.